Imagine a small wooden house in colonial Boston, lit only by the dim glow of candlelight. Inside, the air smells of melted animal fat. Large iron kettles bubble slowly over the fire as wicks are dipped and lifted again and again, forming candles that will light the homes of the city. This is not a place where great scientists are expected to emerge, but in this crowded workshop, on January 17, 1706, one of the most remarkable minds in history entered the world. His name was Benjamin Franklin. Boston in the early 18th century was not the grand American city we know today. It was a small, colonial town of perhaps 7,000 people, clinging to the edge of a vast and unfamiliar continent. Wooden houses crowded narrow, muddy streets. Pigs wandered freely between homes. Ships from England and the Caribbean filled the harbor, bringing news, goods, and rumors from across the Atlantic. Life here was disciplined by religion. The city had been founded by Puritans who believed deeply in hard work, moral discipline, and constant awareness of God's judgment. Sundays were silent and strict. No work, no games, no laughter in the streets, only sermons, prayer, and reflection. Into this serious and demanding world, Benjamin Franklin was born. His father, Josiah Franklin, was a candle maker and soap boiler. It was necessary work, but far from glamorous. Josiah spent long hours collecting animal fat from local butchers, melting it down, pouring it into molds, and selling the finished candles to Boston households. The work was exhausting. The smell of tallow filled the Franklin home day and night. And there was always another challenge, feeding a family of 17 children. Benjamin was Josiah's 15th child and the 10th son. In a household that large, resources were stretched thin. Beds were shared. Clothes were reused. Every child was expected to contribute to the family's survival as soon as they were old enough to work. Yet despite their modest circumstances, the Franklin household contained something rare: conversation. Josiah Franklin loved thoughtful discussion. He often invited ministers, craftsmen, and educated friends to dine with the family. Around the dinner table, they debated religion, politics, morality, and philosophy. Young Benjamin sat quietly and listened. These conversations planted an idea that would shape his entire life. Learning did not belong only to schools. Ideas could be explored anywhere curious people gathered together. Books were another treasure in the Franklin household. They were expensive luxuries in colonial America. A single book could cost a week's wages for a working man. Yet Josiah owned a small collection: religious sermons, devotional writings, and one book that fascinated Benjamin more than any other: Plutarch's Lives, a collection of biographies of great Greek and Roman leaders. Benjamin devoured these stories. He read about heroes who shaped history through courage, intelligence, and discipline. The lives of ancient figures like Solon, Alexander, and Cicero stirred his imagination. From these stories, he learned a powerful lesson. Greatness was not determined by birth alone. It could be achieved through character and effort. Benjamin's mother, Abiah Franklin, also played an important role in his development. Unlike many women of her time, she could read and write. She encouraged learning and helped teach Benjamin his earliest lessons. Later in life, Franklin would write that he could not remember a time when he could not read. Curiosity came naturally to him. As a child, he constantly asked questions. Why does wood float while iron sinks? Why do tides rise and fall? How can ships sail against the wind? His father answered what he could and encouraged the boy to seek answers in books. Recognizing Benjamin's intelligence, Josiah briefly attempted to give him a formal education. At the age of 8, Benjamin was enrolled in the prestigious Boston Latin School, an institution designed to prepare young boys for Harvard College and eventually the ministry. For a short time, Benjamin thrived there. He learned quickly and rose to the top of his class. Teachers praised his ability, but education was expensive. Even public schooling carried hidden costs. Books, clothing, and the loss of a working child's labor placed heavy strain on the Franklin family. After less than a year, Josiah made a difficult decision. Benjamin would have to leave school. His formal education ended at just 10 years old. For most children, that might have meant the end of intellectual development. For Benjamin Franklin, it was only the beginning. Josiah brought the boy into the family candle-making business. Benjamin spent long days cutting wicks, filling molds, tending fires, and delivering candles to customers. He hated it. The work felt repetitive and suffocating. Worse, the smell of boiling animal fat clung to everything. Benjamin began dreaming of escape. He imagined sailing away on one of the many ships in Boston Harbor, exploring distant lands and unknown seas. But Josiah had already lost one son to the ocean. He refused to allow Benjamin to become a sailor. Instead, he searched for another trade that might suit the boy's restless intelligence. For months, father and son walked through Boston, observing different craftsmen at work: carpenters shaping wood, bricklayers constructing walls, blacksmiths hammering glowing iron. These walks became an informal education in mechanics and craftsmanship. Benjamin watched carefully. He noticed how tools worked, how materials behaved, how skilled hands transformed raw elements into useful objects. These observations would later influence his inventions. Yet, none of the trades excited him the way reading did. Books remained his true passion. Benjamin borrowed every volume he could find. He spent his small savings buying second-hand books. At night, after finishing his work, he read by candlelight until exhaustion forced him to sleep. One book captivated him especially: The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. He read it so many times, he nearly memorized entire passages. Through reading, Benjamin created his own education. Then, when he was 12 years old, an opportunity appeared that would change his life. His older brother James Franklin returned from London with a new profession: printing. James had learned the craft in England and planned to open a printing shop in Boston. In the colonial world, printers played a crucial role in society. They produced newspapers, pamphlets, legal documents, and books. Printing was a trade connected directly to ideas. Josiah believed this profession might suit Benjamin perfectly. And so, in 1718, 12-year-old Benjamin Franklin signed an apprenticeship contract with his brother. The agreement bound him to work for James until he turned 21, 9 years of labor. In exchange, he would learn the printing trade. For Benjamin, the print shop was a revelation. Every day brought new texts: political essays, poems, philosophical debates, news from across the Atlantic. Words and ideas flowed through the shop constantly. Benjamin devoured them all. He quickly mastered the physical craft of printing. Setting type required patience and precision. Each letter had to be selected from the type case and arranged backward so that the printed page would appear correctly. It was meticulous work. Benjamin became exceptionally skilled at it. But what fascinated him even more was writing. He admired the elegant essays published in British newspapers, especially those from The Spectator, written by Joseph Addison and Richard Steele. Determined to improve his own writing, Benjamin invented a personal training method. He would read an essay carefully, wait several days, then attempt to rewrite it from memory. Afterward, he compared his version with the original to identify weaknesses in vocabulary, structure, and logic. Sometimes he transformed essays into poetry to expand his vocabulary, then converted them back into prose. It was a self-directed writing school, and it worked. By his teenage years, Benjamin Franklin had developed remarkable skill with words. Yet life in his brother's print shop was not easy. James Franklin was strict and often harsh. Apprenticeship laws gave masters enormous authority, including the right to physically discipline apprentices. Benjamin endured frequent punishments. Their relationship grew increasingly tense. In 1721, James founded a newspaper called the New England Courant, one of the first newspapers in the American colonies that published original commentary rather than simply reprinting news from England. Benjamin desperately wanted to contribute. James refused. He believed his younger brother was too inexperienced. So, Benjamin devised a clever plan. Late at night, he wrote anonymous letters and slipped them under the shop door. The letters were signed by a fictional character named Silence Dogood, supposedly a witty, middle-aged widow offering humorous commentary on society. The letters were brilliant. Readers loved them. They became one of the most popular features in the newspaper. For weeks, no one knew the author's identity. When Benjamin finally revealed the truth, James was furious. His teenage apprentice had fooled him and impressed the entire city. Their relationship never recovered. At 17 years old, Benjamin Franklin made a daring decision. He would run away. Breaking an apprenticeship was illegal, but Benjamin believed freedom was worth the risk. In 1723, he quietly left Boston and boarded a boat bound for New York. He carried almost nothing: a few coins, a change of clothes, and a mind full of knowledge no one could take away. After a difficult journey by boat and on foot, he arrived in Philadelphia, tired, hungry, and unknown. He walked down Market Street, carrying 3 large bread rolls under his arms, the only food he could afford. A young woman standing in a doorway laughed at the strange sight. Her name was Deborah Reed. Years later, she would become his wife. But on that day, Benjamin Franklin was simply a runaway apprentice beginning a new chapter of his life. He was 17 years old, alone, poor, and standing at the very beginning of one of the most extraordinary lives in history. When Benjamin Franklin arrived in Philadelphia in 1723, he was 17 years old, exhausted, and nearly penniless. He had no family in the city, no connections, and no guarantee of work. But he had something that would prove far more valuable: skill. Franklin immediately searched for employment at the city's printing shops. Philadelphia had only a few printers at the time, and his training in Boston gave him a significant advantage. Within days, he found work. The shop belonged to Samuel Keimer, an eccentric printer with unusual habits and inconsistent management. Keimer quickly realized that the young runaway from Boston possessed exceptional ability. Franklin worked faster and more accurately than most experienced printers. Before long, Keimer relied on him heavily to keep the shop running smoothly. Philadelphia itself was very different from Boston. Boston was strict, deeply religious, and socially rigid. Philadelphia, founded by Quakers under William Penn, was more tolerant and open. The city welcomed immigrants from across Europe: English, Germans, Scots, Irish, Jews. Religious differences were less important than practical cooperation. For a curious young man like Franklin, the atmosphere was liberating. He made friends easily and quickly became known for his wit and intelligence. Yet opportunity arrived from an unexpected direction. The governor of Pennsylvania, Sir William Keith, heard about the talented young printer. After meeting Franklin, he was impressed by the young man's ambition and skill. Keith proposed something extraordinary. He encouraged Franklin to travel to London to purchase printing equipment and establish his own printing business in Philadelphia. The governor promised to provide letters of credit that would pay for everything. To a young man of 18, the offer sounded like the opportunity of a lifetime. Franklin accepted. In 1724, he boarded a ship for England, believing a brilliant future awaited him. But when he arrived in London, reality struck. The governor's promised letters of credit never existed. Keith had made promises he could not keep. Franklin was stranded in one of the largest cities in the world, with no money and no support. Yet, instead of despairing, Franklin did what he had always done. He adapted. He quickly found work in London's printing industry, first at Samuel Palmer's printing house, and later at a much larger operation owned by John Watts. London's print shops were far more sophisticated than those in America. They employed dozens of workers and produced books for some of the most prestigious publishers in Europe. Franklin thrived in this environment. His co-workers initially mocked the young American, assuming colonists were unskilled provincials. But Franklin soon proved otherwise. His speed, accuracy, and discipline impressed everyone around him. He also developed habits that set him apart. Most printers drank beer constantly throughout the workday, believing it provided strength for the physically demanding labor of operating the printing press. Franklin disagreed. He drank only water. This unusual habit earned him the nickname, the Water American. His co-workers laughed at him at first, but when they saw that he worked harder and longer without fatigue, some began reconsidering their own habits. During his 2 years in London, Franklin absorbed everything the city had to offer. London in the 1720s was the intellectual center of the English-speaking world. Coffee houses functioned as informal universities, where writers, philosophers, merchants, and scientists gathered to exchange ideas. For the price of a cup of coffee, a man could read newspapers, listen to debates, and participate in discussions that might last for hours. Franklin spent much of his free time in these coffee houses. He read constantly. He met aspiring writers and thinkers. He explored bookshops, memorizing passages from books he could not afford to buy. He formed a small circle of friends who shared his love of literature and debate. Together they critiqued each other's writing and discussed philosophy late into the night. During this period, Franklin also wrote his first published work, a short philosophical pamphlet titled A Dissertation on Liberty and Necessity, Pleasure and Pain. The essay explored questions about free will, morality, and the nature of human behavior. Although Franklin would later consider the work immature, it demonstrated something important. Even as a young man, he was thinking deeply about the nature of human society. But London also taught him a difficult lesson. In England, social mobility was limited. Class divisions were rigid and deeply entrenched. A man born into the working class could become a skilled craftsman, perhaps even a prosperous one, but he would rarely be accepted as a gentleman. Franklin realized that England's society was too hierarchical for someone with his ambitions. America offered something different: opportunity. In 1726, when a merchant named Thomas Denham offered Franklin a chance to return to Philadelphia as a clerk in his business, Franklin accepted immediately. The voyage home took 11 long weeks. Storms battered the ship and supplies ran low. But Franklin spent the journey doing what he always did: observing, thinking, and writing. By the time he returned to Philadelphia at age 20, he was no longer the naive teenager who had left. He had seen the world, and he had learned what kind of life he wanted to build. Back in Philadelphia, Franklin quickly returned to the printing trade. Within a few years, he established his own printing business with a partner named Hugh Meredith. Their shop opened in 1728. From the beginning, Franklin worked with relentless energy. He woke before dawn and often worked late into the night. When deliveries were required, he personally pushed a wheelbarrow full of paper through the streets of Philadelphia. It was a deliberate strategy. Franklin wanted the public to see his industry and determination. The effort paid off. His print shop soon gained a reputation for reliability and quality. In 1729, Franklin purchased a struggling newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette. Under his leadership, it became the most popular newspaper in the American colonies. Franklin wrote many of the articles himself. He combined news with essays, satire, humor, and practical advice. Readers loved the lively style. The newspaper flourished. But Franklin's greatest publishing success came a few years later. In 1732, he introduced a yearly publication called Poor Richard's Almanac. The almanac contained weather predictions, calendars, astronomical data, and practical information for farmers and merchants. But what made it truly popular were Franklin's witty sayings and proverbs. Under the pseudonym Richard Saunders, Franklin filled the almanac with memorable advice about life and success. Many of these sayings are still famous today. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. A penny saved is a penny earned. Fish and visitors stink after 3 days. These phrases captured Franklin's philosophy of life: practical, humorous, and grounded in common sense. The almanac became a bestseller. It sold thousands of copies each year across the colonies. Financial success soon followed. By his late 20s, Franklin was comfortably wealthy, but instead of retiring early, he used his newfound freedom to pursue a wide range of interests. Franklin believed deeply in self-improvement. He created a personal system for developing moral character. He identified 13 virtues that he believed were essential to a good life: temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility. Each evening he evaluated his behavior and recorded any failures in a small notebook. The system was not about perfection. It was about constant improvement. Franklin also believed that communities could improve themselves through cooperation. In 1727, he founded a discussion group called the Junto. The members met weekly to debate moral questions, discuss politics, and share ideas for improving their city. The group later helped launch several important institutions. These included America's first subscription library, a volunteer fire department, and a hospital. Franklin's influence in Philadelphia was growing rapidly, but the discovery that would make him famous around the world came from an entirely different direction: science. In the 1740s, Franklin became fascinated with electricity. At the time, electricity was still mysterious. Scientists could create sparks using friction machines and devices like the Leyden jar, but no one fully understood what electricity actually was. Franklin approached the subject with the same methodical curiosity he applied to everything else. He conducted experiments. He recorded careful observations. He tested ideas systematically. Through these experiments, Franklin made several groundbreaking discoveries. He demonstrated that electricity involved two types of charge, which he called positive and negative. He showed that electrical charge could move between objects rather than being created from nothing, and he developed the concept of electrical conservation, the idea that electrical charge is not destroyed, but simply transferred. Then Franklin proposed a bold hypothesis. Lightning, he suggested, might simply be electricity on a massive scale. To test this idea, he designed an experiment that would become legendary. During a thunderstorm, he flew a kite with a metal wire attached to the top. A metal key was tied to the kite string. As rain soaked the string, it became conductive. Soon, the fibers of the string began to stand upright, charged with electricity from the storm clouds. Franklin carefully moved his knuckle near the metal key. A spark jumped. Lightning and electricity were the same phenomenon. It was one of the most dramatic experiments in the history of science. From this discovery came Franklin's most famous invention, the lightning rod. By placing a metal rod on top of buildings and connecting it to the ground with wire, lightning strikes could be safely conducted into the earth. The invention saved countless buildings and lives from fires caused by lightning. News of Franklin's discoveries spread rapidly through Europe. Scientific societies praised his work. Universities awarded him honorary degrees. The self-taught printer from Philadelphia had become one of the most respected scientists in the world. But even greater challenges still awaited him. Franklin was about to enter the world of politics and help create a nation. By the early 1750s, Benjamin Franklin had already achieved more than most people accomplish in a lifetime. He was wealthy. He was internationally famous for his scientific discoveries. He had founded libraries, civic organizations, and institutions that improved life in Philadelphia. Yet Franklin was about to enter the most important chapter of his life: politics. The British Empire ruled the American colonies, but tensions between the colonies and the British government were beginning to grow. Franklin found himself drawn into these conflicts. In 1751, he was elected to the Pennsylvania Assembly, the colony's legislative body. At first, his role focused on local matters, taxation, defense, and disputes between the colonial government and powerful landowners. But soon, his responsibilities expanded. In 1757, the Pennsylvania Assembly sent Franklin to London as its official representative. His mission was simple, in theory: defend the interests of the American colonies before the British government. Franklin returned to the city where he had once been a poor young printer, but this time, everything was different. He was now an internationally respected scientist and public figure. London society welcomed him. He attended meetings of the Royal Society. He dined with members of Parliament. He exchanged ideas with some of the greatest thinkers of the age, including philosopher David Hume and economist Adam Smith. Franklin believed strongly that the British Empire could remain united. The American colonies, he argued, were loyal subjects of the Crown. They simply wanted fair treatment. But events soon proved that compromise would be difficult. After the costly 7 Years' War, Britain faced enormous debt. The government decided that the American colonies should help pay for the empire's defense. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act. The law required that newspapers, legal documents, and many other printed materials carry an official stamp purchased from the British government. For Americans, the issue was not just the tax itself, it was the principle behind it. Colonists had no representatives in Parliament. They believed that taxation without representation violated their rights as English citizens. Protests erupted throughout the colonies. Crowds burned tax collectors in effigy. Merchants organized boycotts of British goods. The slogan spread rapidly from town to town: "No taxation without representation." Franklin initially believed the protests might calm down, but when he testified before the British Parliament in 1766, he delivered one of the most powerful political arguments of his life. Franklin explained that Americans accepted taxes imposed by their own colonial assemblies, but they rejected taxes imposed by a distant government in which they had no voice. His calm and logical testimony impressed many members of Parliament. Soon afterward, the Stamp Act was repealed. For a moment, it seemed the crisis had passed, but the conflict continued. New taxes followed. Tensions grew deeper. Franklin remained in London for years, attempting to mediate between Britain and the colonies. But his patience was finally exhausted in 1774. That year, he was publicly humiliated before the British Privy Council. He was accused of spreading confidential letters that exposed British officials' plans to restrict colonial freedoms. During the hearing, a government lawyer attacked Franklin personally for nearly an hour. He called him dishonest. He called him a traitor. Franklin stood silently through the entire speech. He did not defend himself. But something changed in that moment. For nearly 2 decades, he had tried to preserve peace between Britain and America. Now he realized reconciliation might be impossible. In 1775, Franklin sailed back to Philadelphia. War had already begun. Only weeks earlier, British soldiers and colonial militia had clashed at Lexington and Concord. The American Revolution was underway. Franklin was now 69 years old. Yet he immediately joined the Second Continental Congress. He quickly became one of its most respected leaders. In 1776, Franklin joined a small committee assigned to draft a declaration explaining why the colonies were breaking away from Britain. The primary author was Thomas Jefferson, but Franklin helped edit the document. One of his most famous revisions changed Jefferson's phrase, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable," to the simpler and more powerful words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Franklin signed the document, knowing that failure would mean execution for treason. But the revolution faced enormous challenges. The American army was poorly supplied and often outnumbered. Victory seemed uncertain. Franklin soon received a new mission, perhaps the most important diplomatic mission in American history. In late 1776, Congress sent him to France. His task was to persuade the French government to support the American Revolution. At 70 years old, Franklin crossed the Atlantic once again. France greeted him with fascination. Franklin understood the importance of image. Instead of dressing like a European aristocrat, he appeared in simple clothing and a fur cap. He presented himself as a wise philosopher from the New World. The image captivated French society. In Paris, Franklin became a celebrity. His portrait appeared on medallions and prints. Intellectuals sought his conversation. Women admired his charm. But Franklin's true work took place behind the scenes. He negotiated constantly with French officials. He argued that supporting America would weaken Britain, France's greatest rival. At first, the French government hesitated. They did not want to support a rebellion that might fail. Then, in 1777, news arrived that American forces had defeated a British army at the Battle of Saratoga. The victory changed everything. It proved that the American revolutionaries could defeat British troops. In 1778, France formally allied with the United States. French ships, soldiers, and financial support began flowing across the Atlantic. The alliance transformed the war. Without French assistance, the American Revolution might never have succeeded. Franklin spent nearly a decade in France managing this crucial relationship. Finally, in 1781, the British Army under General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. The war was effectively over. 2 years later, Franklin helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which officially recognized American independence. He was now 77 years old. After years abroad, he longed to return home. In 1785, Franklin sailed back to Philadelphia. Crowds greeted him as a hero, but his work was not finished. The new nation faced serious challenges. The government created under the Articles of Confederation was weak and ineffective. In 1787, representatives from across the states gathered in Philadelphia to create a new constitution. Franklin, now 81, was the oldest delegate at the convention. His health was failing. He suffered from painful kidney stones and often needed assistance to walk. Yet, he attended nearly every meeting. Franklin rarely spoke during the debates. But when the convention threatened to collapse because of disagreements between large and small states, he intervened. Franklin urged the delegates to compromise. He reminded them that no constitution could be perfect, but unity was essential. His words carried enormous weight. The delegates eventually reached agreement. On September 17, 1787, the United States Constitution was signed. Franklin added his name to the document. He was now the only person to have signed 4 foundational documents of the United States: the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Alliance with France, the Treaty of Paris, and the Constitution. After the signing, Franklin looked at the carved sun on the back of George Washington's chair. For months, he had wondered whether it represented a rising sun or a setting one. Now he knew. "It is," he said quietly, "a rising sun." In his final years, Franklin remained active in public life. He served as president of Pennsylvania's Executive Council, essentially the state's governor. He also became a strong advocate for the abolition of slavery. Late in life, he helped lead the Pennsylvania Society for the Abolition of Slavery and petitioned Congress to end the practice. Even at 84, he was still fighting for human freedom. Benjamin Franklin died on April 17, 1790. He was 84 years old. His funeral in Philadelphia drew 20,000 people, nearly half the city's population. Tributes came from across the world. France declared a national period of mourning. The United States honored him as one of its greatest founders. Franklin had lived an extraordinary life, a runaway apprentice who became a scientist, a printer who became a philosopher, a colonial subject who helped create a nation. Today, his legacy surrounds us: public libraries, volunteer fire departments, scientific discoveries about electricity, the values of industry, curiosity, and self-improvement. They all trace back to Benjamin Franklin. His face appears on the $100 bill, but his true legacy cannot be printed on currency. It lives in the idea that knowledge belongs to everyone, that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things, and that curiosity, discipline, and cooperation can change the world. The boy who once read by candlelight helped illuminate the future of a nation, and centuries later, the light of Benjamin Franklin still shines.